In today's show, you'll hear investor perspectives on the COVID-19 impact on startup fundraising. This is Investor Perspectives. I'm the host of Investor Connect, Hall T. Martin, where we connect startups and investors for funding. It's the time of COVID-19. We're in lockdown looking to reopen the economy in the U.S. The virus has changed the way the world looks with empty streets, shuttered stores, and death counts rising. There are signs of flattening the curve, so we now look to the other side when the economy will reopen. I hope you enjoy this episode. Today we have with us Christian Kamir, Managing Partner of Sesame Capital, who has been on Investor Connect before. What new investment thesis will the COVID-19 pandemic give us?
I think what we see more is actually the thesis around solving the real world problems, right? A lot of what we've seen now is that we have paid a lot of attention to funding, let's call it lifestyle companies and things like companies that don't really solve a real world problem. So in the future, there's going to be more focus on that, and there's going to be more focus, as far as we are concerned, on the due diligence side, on things like supply chain dependencies. A lot of companies were just being dried out because they didn't have access to whatever material they needed to produce something, which is less important on our end, but has indirect effects. Then thirdly, payment systems probably that replace physical cash will get a new focus. It's actually less known that a lot of activity, even in developed countries like the United States, are still being transacted in cash on a daily basis. It's like 20 to 40%. And so needless to say, with everybody being very concerned about the transmission of germs and otherwise unhealthy particles, people try to do this less and less. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on technologies that will replace the need for cash. So specifically around the topic of micropayments, sometimes it doesn't make sense to send a dollar because the fees will eat up any profit that the company would be receiving in terms of being able to receive micropayments. And those solutions have been around, but I think they haven't given much focus. And then lastly, and that's actually something I tried for the first time, semi-successful yesterday, is the whole topic of telehealth, right? I don't know if you ever tried it. It's still somewhat cumbersome, and there need to be better solutions. And they also have a lot to do with, again, the topic of identity, right? Because in order to provide this reliable, and by reliable, I mean compliant with regulation pertaining to privacy and HIPAA, and in other countries, they're actually more elevated. You want to make sure that you have an identity solution that's not limited to a certain application, so that you can then also use for other solutions. And that comes down to what we talked earlier. If you need to reliably give out funds as a federal government, as a state, then you need to be able to identify with 100% certainty that the funds will receive a particular individual. And the amount of fraud in that space that's related to legacy technology is enormous. It's, depending on what statistics you're looking, it's 10 to 20%, as in it's $100, $200 million out of every $1 trillion. It's enormous. And a lot of that has to do with the technology that the government is using, which sometimes goes back to like old mainframe computers and computer languages like COBOL that no one ever can program. That's still being used in our legacy healthcare system, right? And so I think those are new investment theses that now that the government has been made painfully aware, and that this has been a topic of daily discussion, as in one of the most used search terms, where's my check? IRS or whoever put a check in the mail and it's not here. And there is still people waiting for their checks today. Can you think about that overhead? So I mentioned earlier, it costs already $3 to create that check, but now you got a frantic individual on the other end who's going to hit every possible intake system that the government created, an inbox, mailbox, will pick up the phone, obviously, right? Because he, she is depending on that check, but now you have to find it, right? And that is all, they're just all externalities of legacy technologies that we have just tolerated. I mean, the things, inefficient systems like the DMV, at this point in time should not exist. Right? There's technical solutions to what there. So it comes down to your original question was, what's the new investment thesis? The new investment thesis is government has been sluggish, but government has been put on high alert that if this will ever happen again, which is super likely, they need to have better systems in place because they're going to be the one taking the brunt if those systems aren't in place, because they have been alerted right now, hey, you're using legacy technology that's not suitable to address things like a pandemic.
What startup sectors are going to be diminished or eliminated by COVID-19? What's going down and what's going away?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine any particular startup sector that I would consider to be eliminated entirely by this situation. There's a couple of kind of obvious things, such as co-working spaces. A lot of people have been now indoctrinated in being able and happy to work from home, or at least have been sufficiently equipped to be able to do that. So I think that space will suffer a lot. Then the obvious one being any type of event businesses. People won't be aggregating for some time. If some people say, well, they will never be doing this again. Then the third obvious one being travel. I think a lot of people will avoid travel as much as possible and stick to the necessities when they have to travel. And then lastly, and that's kind of more a headline, is I think we'll see a huge discount in terms of funding of what I consider kind of lifestyle businesses. Businesses where it's another, let's call it social app, it's another hobby type thing. And because we'll see, I think, and hope, a lot more businesses that attack real world problems, which I think we have a lot that don't get enough attention. Right.
Right. Yeah, it seems not essential is going to be falling way down on the list, and essential is going to come to the top and important in the middle. So it'd be interesting to see where the values land on that. But I think it's, in one sense, it's a great opportunity to move the system forward with new technologies on the financial side, contactless currency, as well as taking care of these issues of communication with the government. It just seems a lot of inefficiencies have been built up over the years, and that's about to change, which is a great silver lining on this cloud of coronavirus.
Oh, yeah, indeed. So there's always a good aspect to, let's call it quote unquote crises, right? You have to focus. The focus is good as far as I'm concerned to develop real world solutions. We like real world solutions, right? We like sustainable implementations of things that will actually improve people's life for the long term. And I think if you look overall at the United States, the country we are living in, and the people that actually produce something and the people that are live of other entities' production, it's enormous, right? So we created this of banking, insurance, and so forth. They employ a lot of people, but they don't produce anything, right? So they are all very much rent-seeking in nature. And I think a focus is going to be given on eliminating those inefficiencies. So we are super bullish on anything that's kind of a savings technology. And you can think of this in terms of what we in the past misguidedly already called fintech, financial technologies. I think we're going to see a huge wave of what I would call actual fintech. So what I mean by that, if you look at companies in the past, such as PayPal and the Zenefits and so forth, those were just more or less window dressings to the legacy financial systems, right? They still had to interact with banks. It take you like 2-3 days sometimes to get your money out of PayPal because they still have to interact with the legacy financial systems. And so this type of is really being held artificially in place without a technology reason behind it. And so I think we have a huge wave in that regards coming within the next 5 years that will pertain to any type of value transfer. Might this be the most simple one, being money, or more complex ones, i.e., why is there no infrastructure yet for you and I to be able to exchange, let's say, a vehicle without needing to go to the DMV, right? So all of the technologies are in place. We all have that. They're just required to be adopted by government for the most part, right? So that I can sell you actually a car peer-to-peer and I can transfer the title to you from my phone. And eventually we'll hopefully see the same thing for more complex things such as real estate and so forth. Again, think about it this way. All of these entities, those legacy middlemen, including government entities, what are they doing? They're maintaining databases, right? They're guardians of these databases. And databases are highly, highly insecure. And to the extent of we have relatively civil implementations here in the developed nations, but if you look at other countries, they are happy if they have a database and or they still have catalogs of paper. And what you see is that people are that their property is being withheld and or stolen simply by being able to manipulate those records. Well, we are only half a step away from that, right? Where you have single point of failure entities that maintain legacy databases that contain these records that have the entry whether or not you own property. That's preposterous, right? At this point in time, we have technology that's much more sophisticated that doesn't rely on database infrastructure, which is something that needs to be radically changed all over, either through a blockchain-based implementation and or more likely graph-based solutions. But unfortunately, there's just very little knowledge in government circles around the availability of these technologies. And that's something that we're trying to fix. And now I think, given that particular pandemic, we being technologists, not we here as an entity, but we as technologists, I think, have a lot more ears that will listen to this particular advice.
That's great. Do you think we'll see a lot more adoption of blockchain because it solves some of these issues coming up, securing the supply chain, securing the financial chain, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this will center around this topic of identity. You probably heard about all these ideas of starting to track people and where they are, to comply with social distancing and or showing which people are infected and keep track of those. Well, if we just really nearly adapt those ideas, well, that will have long-term effects on our privacy, right? Because as we know from past government actions, a lot of these measures will never be taken back. People don't realize that this things that was euphemistically called the Patriot Act, which is just a colloquial name for a surveillance act, that's actually not the real name of that particular act, is being constantly renewed. But it's a disaster for privacy and the democratic nature of our industry. But think about it this way. If all of a sudden there's technology available and maybe mandated by regulation that would track you and everybody else at all times and their health status, if that is not being revoked, again, which there's a 50-50 chance it will, or will always be renewed, that sets the stage for very, very unpleasant, non-democratic environments. I personally don't want to live in a surveillance state such as China or other countries around the world. I cherish the freedoms that we have as Americans specifically. That's why I moved here 20 years ago.
Great. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think the one thing that this crisis also has shown us is it's really hard to come by great information, right? I think there's probably, no one will dispute that, more misinformation than true information out there. And it will probably take months before we actually have reliable data that will speak to the truth of falsehood, a lot of these misguidedness of a lot of these measures. And I don't want to make any predictions, but I think it's always ill-advised to make hasty decisions without having all the data. And secondarily, it's more important to implement more useful data distribution solutions than we have right now. Because at the moment, what happens is people can turn to one or more channel and they will get one particular worldview. Not a good idea, right? Because it has led to a lot of polarization in our society. But more importantly, it allows people to uncritically simply absorb one particular opinion rather than getting a contrasting opinion. And this is actually the larger pandemic in my mind, as in it's a pandemic of mind, that we have misinformation being spread on a daily basis, and it's so much harder to get to ground truth. It takes a lot of work to find out the reality behind the information that's being distributed. And that's actually one of my largest passion to have fixed, because at the end of the day, everything starts with the information that you absorb. Whatever you put into your body, you probably had some information beforehand before you ate or drank it. And it's the same thing with any other thought you put into your head. And unfortunately, what we did is we kind of got rid of what we called the forces, got rid of journalism entirely. And instead, everything is kind of commercial in nature, to where every journalist is being measured on how many clicks she can generate. And that's all derivative things such as Google and Facebook, to where everybody was made a product, because you and I, we're not users of Google. We are the product that they're selling to the advertiser. And that is at the core problem, in my opinion, of what's wrong with information distribution, right? When you Google something, you're not searching anything, right? You're running a query against the index, which is mostly advertising, even the stuff that's not marked with that. So you can do, and everybody should do this, the test yourself. You're searching for real information, i.e., what is the right measure against COVID. And what you'll find, it has nothing to do with scientific information. It's nothing that's peer-reviewed. It's some form of clickbait that just pops up for you, that you click on and absorb as if it was reality. There's information that you should be following, regardless who disseminated it, right? So that's part of it. It's like, why do people listen to journalists with a background in political history or something on matters of health and diet and otherwise important information that I should be getting from scientists, right? From peer-reviewed information. So yeah, that has been my largest passion for more than a decade at this point in time. It's a big problem to solve.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest issues out there is data and control of it, and what can the platforms do with your data, your identity, your content, your other information. And
yes,
it seems like that dialogue was rolling until COVID hit, and now it's kind of on the back burner because we have to take care of COVID. And do you think when COVID is over, it'll come back to the fore, or do you think something else will have to bring it back up?
Well, I'm not optimistic.
Okay.
I'm trying to do the little that I can to influence people in government that I'm in contact with, to alert them to the dangers of implementing certain measures. Again, has to do with tracking violations of privacy. And yes, there was a good momentum, like you pointed out, that was mostly created by the Facebook situation, actually inadvertently 2 times triggered by Facebook. The first time was the whole Cambridge Analytica disaster, which was just kind of the latest disaster that they created. But then secondly, it was also the whole Facebook Libra situation, where the government was alerted to the fact that a private entity might be able to issue currency or create a payment system that all of a sudden would be used by more people around the world than any singular nation state's currency. But so there's a real danger. So I was just this morning listening to a long discussion around self-proclaimed experts around the whole topic of CBDC, which is central-based digital currencies, which is tightly connected to this idea of privacy. So what I mean by that is, think about a world where the government would know about every single penny that you're spending and was able to inject itself into that transaction, which is something that we will likely see in China. But is this something that we want here? And I would strongly suggest we would not want to see that, because that has all the ingredients for state dictatorship, right? If a centralized government entity could enforce the movement of every single penny of all of its citizens and or otherwise citizens of other nation states touching this particular currency, you can do away essentially with freedom of speech at this point in time, right?
Yeah, it's scary times when people start getting to that level of control and that lack of privacy. So, like I say, when COVID's over, it'd be interesting to go back to address it.
Yeah, I think the one good thing that I've heard multiple times, and that's maybe just my form of consumption, is but a lot of people have pointed out this typical battle cry that politicians kind of internalized of never let a good crisis go to waste. You've probably heard that. As in, hey, we got this scary thing here that can be used to motivate people to do something, right? So we need to be acutely aware of what that something is so that we don't let, quote unquote, government create yet another invasive legislation that at the end of the day, we won't be able to easily, if at all, roll back. Again, comes down to things like the Patriot Act, my personal opinion, utterly unconstitutional. The type of surveillance that can be done without being checked by a judge, by another part of the government, is utterly absurd. At this point in time, why have a legal system at all if the government can milly-vanilly monitor any behavior of yours, including any conversation you ever had in the past? That makes utterly no sense, but more importantly, it undermines democracy. Right? It's not something that a self-proclaimed democratic state should be able to do, period. But that's the status. I think most people aren't aware of that. That's the current status.
Well, appreciate you sharing these thoughts with us today. Looking forward to seeing how we navigate our way through these COVID waters to the other side. Looking forward to catching up with you next time, and appreciate the information and the feedback. Next up is Peter Adams, managing partner of the Rockies Venture Fund and Pandemic Impact Fund. What new investment thesis will the COVID-19 pandemic give us?
Well, for us, we've had a big shift in our thesis. How last time you and I talked, we were working on the Rockies Impact Fund, and that has shifted now. We've redone all of our thesis and the documents and the fund, and it is now the Pandemic Impact Fund. And so we saw a huge opportunity and lots of gaps left in the market. Now, we saw a lot of people who were creating relief funds, and that's awesome, who were collecting money to help people who've been damaged by this. We see a lot of people creating funds to invest in PPE and things like this that are commodities, obviously in short supply, and they're solving immediate problems. But what we did see was a gap in people making long-term investments, not only to impact this pandemic, but also future pandemics. If you look at Bill Gates' presentations, what's happening is the time between pandemics used to be, 100 years and then 20 years. And if you look over the last 30 years, it's a veritable hockey stick of numbers of people impacted by pandemics. So this is not going to be something that when this pandemic is solved, it's going to be gone for another 50 or 100 years. It's going to be more like 3 to 5 year intervals as we are increasingly global. So focusing on this, our thesis has become that we're also focusing more broadly than just healthcare. This is not, healthcare is, of course, a big, core of this, but the problems that we're seeing are social and economic as well. So we're looking at things that are going to hit us, we're looking at things that are about detection, about mitigation, and about resilience. So really the full way of looking at this. So things that we can track and discover pandemics faster. We're looking at a cool technology out of Israel that detects pandemic viruses in sewers. So you can see how much of the pandemic and where it's coming from, and you can detect it before anybody's even, really noticed it. So this is really cool. And that's been rolled out in Europe and Pakistan. We're behind here in the US. But so the detection and mitigation, detection was a big problem for us in this current one. Mitigation, Some of the companies we've already invested in are huge for mitigation, like PharmaJet, the needle-free injections, or Cirrus MD, telehealth companies, things like that help us to mitigate the impacts. There's one cool new company we're talking to called Respirigen, who has a patented oxygen bubble technology that effectively allows the human body to breathe without relying on the lungs. And as we all know, all these people on respirators, which of course are in short supply, but even when people are on respirators, they're dying because they can't absorb oxygen. Respirigen oxygen bubbles actually allow the body to absorb oxygen without the lungs. So that's going to be a huge sort of mitigation technology. And then finally, we're working on things about community resiliency. We always talk about the cure being worse than the disease. And so we are seeing this huge economic impact and social impact of distancing and, economic shutdown. So we're looking at technologies that help to make work, the remote stuff that we're doing, distance education. We're going to see huge impacts in supply chain. So we'll look at novel supply chain technologies. Those are all going to have giant impact and will be not just things that are important during impact or during pandemics, but also will have huge opportunities in between pandemics. They're sort of universally valuable technologies.
So what startup sectors will be diminished or eliminated by COVID-19? What's going to go away or go down dramatically?
Well, the obvious stuff we've seen already, of course, is travel, restaurant, retail, and I think they'll continue to be hurt. But I'm, as an investor, I think of myself as a futurist. I'm investing in things that are going to exit 5, 6, 7 years from now. So I'm always looking at what the trickle-down impacts of pandemic and economic, shutdown are going to be. And I think we need to be thinking about those things that aren't even impacting us yet, but will. Having 33.5 million people out of business, or out of work rather, means that people won't be able to pay mortgages or rent. We'll have reduced volumes of sales. And those are going to cascade throughout the community or throughout the business community and startups, and certainly in supply chains. So, one industry that's going to be hurt severely I just did some research, banking has only gone down, their stocks maybe 20, 25%. But I expect that as commercial real estate people are unable to pay their mortgages or rents, as companies are going out of business and can't, make their payments and they're foreclosing, the banks are going to be the ones who are going to absorb a lot of that. Now, for startups, that will have an impact. Of course, usually we don't look to banks for startups, but at a certain point, banks do, of course, have things like asset-backed lending, receivables finance, inventory finance, things like that. I think that even that will be drying up, and it'll be harder and harder for companies to get access to that. Commercial real estate, super hard hit already, but even more. We've just seen the tip of the iceberg. Oil and gas, we've seen, of course, has already been hit, but it's going to be interesting to look at the trickle down of that, as well as all of these, especially smaller companies, go out of business. And we do a lot of clean tech investing. So the impacts there will be significant because, as you know, a big part about clean energy investment and renewables is we look at the economic variables of cost of fossil fuels versus renewables. Now, with oil going from $50 down to $20 and even, whatever it was, minus $18 a barrel, but, back to 20-ish now, I guess, that still increases that and makes it harder in some ways for renewables to compete. But I think on the other hand, there may be some positives as some of these smaller companies, smaller oil and gas companies are going out of business. There may be gaps that could continue to be filled by renewables. So that'll be interesting. The other place I look to is, 2008, 2009, the residential real estate was the cause and effect of that downturn. So far, real estate has been not impacted. But when you think about it, if people start defaulting on mortgages, it's going to be really hard for banks to give new mortgages, and that's going to create a constriction of buying activities. So that will impact residential real estate. But also we may see interest rates go up, not in the short term, but this is long term. Having released $3 trillion worth of stimulus money into the economy, it's hard to see inflation not somehow, coming along. And of course, interest rates tend to follow that. So those are, and those are impacts that, are probably 12, 18, months down the road as this really tends to play out. But yeah, I think it'll be not just travel, restaurant, and retail. It's going to be a lot of different sectors will be hit.
So where do you think all those unemployed people will come back, and where will they find new jobs? Some will come back to restaurants and retail, because some of it will still be there, but not as much. But where are the rest of them going to go find jobs? Where do you think they should look?
Yeah, that is a great question. And again, I don't think this is not going to be something like 9 months from now. Everybody's going to be back in their same jobs. And so this is going to be really hurting. And I was just reading about, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, back in the 30s, then when, after the Great Depression, that the government created these types of projects. Maybe the government will do things like that. But even before this recession pandemic hit, we were changing how people work pretty rapidly in the United States. By 2024, we were looking at, that's where we cross over, where more than half of people in the US are working for themselves, as opposed to for large corporations. So I think, certainly a certain portion of these people will just retire, but a certain portion of these people will take the industry knowledge they've got and create great startups, and we'll be here to invest in them. That's great. But others will be doing sort of this gig economy type stuff. And I think we'll see more of that. I think we'll see companies using gig type services more than major corporations to supply those things. And so one company we're working with who has created a platform, it's called Opolis, where basically if you're working for yourself, say as a graphic designer for 5 clients for $1,000 a month each, right now you get all that money. You have to make your quarterly deposits or monthly, whatever it is, to the IRS, and you have to figure out your own health insurance. You don't have unemployment and all that. Well, the way this platform works is you become, an employee of that company. Your 5 clients pay Opolis, then they pay your health insurance, they pay your unemployment, they pay your workers' comp, they make your deductions and pay your taxes, and you get a paycheck just like you would if you worked for a real company. And I think we'll see more and more things like that will help the over 50% of people who are working for themselves in this gig economy.
Well, that's great. I can see restaurant workers, for example, instead of taking the food from the kitchen to the table, they're going to be taking it from the restaurant to the customer's home. And you see a lot of hiring going on in the delivery services because the supply chain is shifting from the retail to the home, and restaurants shifting from dine-in to take-out. And so I see, the numbers there are fantastic as how many people they're hiring. So I could see some of that taking up existing employees and moving them into a different part of the supply chain. But, 6 months ago, AI and robotics, they were coming to take our job, and that was a bad thing. But now they're coming to take our job because we're in quarantine, so it's a good thing. And so I think there's going to need to be a place for all these other people to go. And I just wonder how many are going to be able to adapt to robotics programming and AI management and those type of things. I was just curious as to what your thoughts were there.
Yeah, well, I think that will certainly be the case. Unfortunately, it will take a while for, education and all of those things to catch up with that. I mean, I would be a bad AI or robotics guy if I had in that industry. But if I were 20 years younger, I would love to learn that stuff. I mean, so I think some of those things, the trajectories that we were already on, I think those will continue and probably increase. So I think that's a big thing. Those will lead to, of course, interesting social changes. And, how do we deal with all of that? People were afraid when computers came around that everybody would lose their job. But of course, the computer industry has created more jobs than have been lost. So I expect all of these things, there's still going to be room for people.
Great. One final question. Do you think we'll go from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week to accommodate the change?
I think maybe some people will, but the rest of us are still working 60, 80 hours a week. I have to say, working from home, it's so easy to, go have dinner, hang out with family, do that time, and then, come back and, start writing or, doing whatever needs to be done.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you taking time to talk today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
All right. Well, always a pleasure, Hall. Thanks very much.
Next is Phil Nadell, founder and managing partner of Forefront Venture Partners. So what new investment thesis will the COVID-19 pandemic give us?
Well, I don't think there will be a lot of new investment theses. I think that there will be an acceleration, as I mentioned, of some trends that we've observed over the last several months or even years. So, I think that you'll see a proliferation of online, learning and health administration and work and all of that. And I think that in terms of a thesis, if you want to look for one, trying to find businesses or industries that are jumping on that shift, that are taking advantage of that, I think will be important and will be profitable. So I think when you look at, I wouldn't say that there are new theses. It's just looking at trends that are occurring. Crowd gathering businesses like movie theaters and gyms and restaurants are going to be struggling, in my view. And so what's going to replace them? If we're not going to movie theaters, obviously we're watching more Netflix. Maybe people are playing more video games. What else? And we'll look for those things. If people are not going to their gyms, certainly they're buying and using more Pelotons and other at-home fitness equipment. So what other companies are going to benefit from that? I mean, if you look at, again, trickle-down effects. So if you're a company that provides content for, online remote learning or fitness companies, that would be a company that would benefit. If we're not going out to restaurants and supermarkets as much as we were, who benefits? What companies benefit? Certainly delivery companies, right? But what else? Are we going to see more of these services that are delivering, food packages or the ingredients where you cook the meal yourself? What other businesses benefit from those areas declining? So, we're keeping our radar, our antenna up on those things and trying to stay ahead of the curve. And again, taking sort of a more cautious view on certain industries we think will be negatively affected by the environment.
And so what startup sectors will be diminished or eliminated by COVID-19? What do you think is just going to go away or at least go down dramatically?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think that businesses that are focused on crowd gathering, like movie theaters, like malls, gyms, restaurants, supermarkets, anywhere where there's a big crowd, stadiums, in-person conferences and concerts and Broadway shows, any place you have a big, crowd that gathers, those kinds of things I think will be hurt. And I think that also, as we discussed, businesses where there's a lot of human interaction, like an assembly line, will be shifting to more automated means of production. I think things like cloud computing will continue to grow at an accelerated pace because companies need the flexibility especially when they're operating online, they need the flexibility and want the flexibility of a cloud computing solution. So I think that it's hard to say that certain businesses will go away completely, right? I mean, that's a really difficult call to make as we're in the midst of this. But I certainly think in the near term and in the midterm, we're going to see a big decline in those sectors where there are a lot of people congregating and crowds, and also anything that requires, human interaction. So payments by cash and even by credit card will decline in favor of digital payments. I think that can be done on our devices. And so I think those things we're going to see shift as well.
What do you think is going to happen with co-working? Where do you think that's going to end up?
Yeah, I think that, co-working, I think will bounce back. And I think that there will be more work from home. And I think that a lot of companies have found during this environment that remote work, whether it's, working from home or working from a, sort of a co-working, like a WeWork facility, it makes a lot of sense for them, right? They save a lot of money on rent. Employees oftentimes are able to BYOD, bring their own device, and they don't have to provide the physical building, physical premises for them. And so I think that trend is going to accelerate, more working at home and probably some co-working. But I think that, again, for the co-working, you're going to see people somewhat reluctant. I think there'll be shifts in how co-working space is situated and set up to accommodate people's concerns about being too close to other people. I guess what I'm worried or thinking about is not everyone will want to stay home and work. But if companies are reducing their dependence on physical space, office space, then co-working will benefit in part from that, I believe.
In the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I think that, it's important for talking about, going back to the subject of startup investing and startups raising money. I think it's important for startups to preserve their runway, but to be able to tell the story to investors of how they got through this challenging environment, right? So this is a test for a lot of startups, and those that make it should be able to tell a good story of resilience to investors. Like, if we can make it through COVID-19, we can make it through anything. And here's what we did, and here's how quickly we adapted during this crisis, and why we'll make for a good investment for you, because we're resourceful, we're resilient, we watch every dollar and preserve our runway. So I think it's important for founders to own that story and to tell that story. We've had several of our portfolio companies who've very successfully navigated this challenging environment and made really the best out of it. Some of them have even done very well as a result. But even those that are in sectors that have been hard hit are making the best and getting by. And I think that that's a testament to them and their resilience and resourcefulness. And if you're raising money, that's a story that I, as an investor, want to hear. I want to hear how you got through it. And yes, okay, I understand that revenues may be down, but that doesn't tell the whole story. I want to hear what changes you made, what did you do to adapt, because that really reveals a lot about a founder and about their team.
Yeah, it's times like these you find who are the real leaders and who can really grow a business. And it's a great test for all the startups that are out there. So it's great to see some of these guys really step up and carry it forward for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're exactly right. This is a test for many of them, and many companies are failing and will continue to fail. But the ones who get through and survive are stronger for it. And I think that that's an important message for them to tell to investors, that they're stronger for it. And many of them also find out that there was a lot of fat in their monthly burn that they can permanently eliminate. They don't have to go back to burning as much cash as they were. They can make permanent changes that will reduce their spend. And so I think that's a positive as well that will come out of it. And again, something that should be communicated to potential investors.
Great. Well, I appreciate you joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Thanks very much, Hall. Thank you as always for inviting me.
And next up is Steve Shapiro, Managing Partner of eHealth Ventures. Great. So what new investment thesis will COVID-19 pandemic give us?
So one thing, you don't want to do things dramatically different than what your core is, and I think that's good for a venture fund or for a company. You may not want to totally break away from what you're really good at and what your core technology is, but you need to dig inside and see how can this be utilized or modified a little bit to take advantage of the coronavirus. I think we're going to be faced with this for many years. And, I think when you go out for investments, it's going to be interesting if part of this ecosystem. So, that's definitely part of it, as I describe examples of some of our companies and how we're handling that. So, healthcare is one area that's going to come out really good out of it as far as new opportunities for entrepreneurs, for growth companies and venture funds. There's many, many other areas affected. I think a lot about education, with grandchildren now, and what's education going to be in a year and 3 years from now? That's going to be reinvented, and what opportunities will exist there. The work at home is going to be so important now, because once things open up, we're going to find out, wow, it worked pretty well with people working from home. And then they'll spend time traveling. Maybe they're more productive because they're not out socializing and traveling. And so what tools does a company have to really monitor productivity? And what cybersecurity in your home? So the first thing I really realized the economic impact was in January. One day I have some Apple stock and it fell. And I looked into why it fell. And the reason it fell was they have a group of people that go to China every month to look at where their product is in production. And they would go into the factories and monitor the production. And they didn't go in January. And so people were saying, what's going to happen to the ecosystem with China falling out? And so what happened, to make a long story short, is the people that used to travel to China for Apple, they can do it remotely, what they used to do in person. The reason they went in person was really concerned with the security of what's going on. They didn't want anybody to be able to tap into what their remote communication was, which emphasizes the importance of having cybersecurity and have the right security at your home and your computers. And I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Right. Yeah, I found that moving a physical event online basically can cut the time in half. What used to be an hour meeting is now half hour. You do lose the networking and the hallway discussions, but the core of the meeting gets done the same. And so I agree. I think it's going to be a tremendous benefit that most aren't going to give up. They're going to keep at it. Plus the reduction in commute time. Going from one Zoom to the next is zero commute time, and it's hard to beat that on efficiency.
And your hours will expand. People used to study 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, whatever. When you're at home, you're always working, right?
That's the risk, is if it's at home and you're at home, you can be drawn into more work, and you have to set boundaries, I guess, on that one. So my last question is, what startup sectors will be diminished or eliminated by COVID-19? What's going down? What's going away?
Well, the obvious one is the travel industry, and, both for pleasure. My wife and I were supposed to be in Italy today, a trip that we had planned months ago, probably 6 months ago. And obviously we're not there. I'm home working and talking to you now. So how is it going to affect pleasure and business, just like conferences and going to China to see a manufacturer or whatever? I think that's going to change a lot. And, with airlines, hearts out to them, how they're going to be affected. Convention support, conferences, that's a killer. Commercial real estate, how will that be affected? And, probably what some companies will do is say you come into work 3 days a week and you work at home 2 days a week and you stagger hours. So they need less square footage, for their office space. So that could be affected. Shopping malls, retail. Well, Amazon started the whole refocus of the retail industry. And those companies that are able to adopt to the new normal will do fine. For those that can't, are going to go out of business. And we're seeing some of that. The entertainment industry, would you go to a movie theater now?
What about healthcare? What's going to diminish in the healthcare space?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think in healthcare, there'll be less office visits. So it actually could hurt the primary care physician. So you build a relationship with the primary care physician, you know and see him, but now you do it remotely, you could use a service for that. But I think it could hurt in a primary care physician. And in the area specialists, they're going to have to adapt to it. But there could be more of, less, in a way, it's more personal. I heard one person talk once and say, When I was a child, my doctor came to my house if I had the flu or virus. I didn't go into an office. So we're going back to that. Now you're still in your home environment when you talk to your doctor. But we'll see what plays out. But I think overall, healthcare is definitely going to change as everything I've talked about earlier with digital health, telehealth and stuff. But then it's going to be less office visits. There'll be less. I think things are going to be done in your home now. We have one of our portfolio companies that will eventually do blood tests at your home, that you don't have to go out to have your blood tests done. So, I think more and more things in healthcare are going to be done remotely and at home.
What about urgent care centers? It seems like they popped up because it was just so challenging to go travel down to meet your doctor in his office. And if he's telecommuting into your house through the FaceTime or the web, what happens to those urgent care centers? Are they going to lose market share?
Not in the short term, because the technology is not there yet to do everything in your home. But I think over time, you won't have to leave your home to have it diagnosed. There's certainly technology out there that will do your blood pressure, that can look in your eyes, your ears. We have a couple companies that deal in eye care where you have goggles and they diagnose things in your eyes, and they'll do your pressure from your eyes remotely. And we're looking at, in fact, one of the companies that won in our competition we just did last week has a pair of goggles that will go into much more depth about eye care remotely, where you don't have to go into the office. So, but that's a few years off, but I think that'll happen. So with urgent care, that can happen at home instead of going into the urgent care center.
My next guest is Eileen Chan of 13 Ventures. Great. So what new investment thesis will the COVID-19 pandemic give us?
COVID-19 pandemic brought into focus vulnerability in the system. So as an investor, it is our responsibility to make sustainable investment in great and emerging business. To share what our fund, the 13 Ventures, has been doing during the pandemic, our strategy is very simple. We have invested in consumer-oriented business with a strong online presence. And as I mentioned early on about the online presence thing. And currently in our portfolio, we have the safe haven companies that offer innovative products for daily use, such as plant-based food, feminine hygiene products, and chemical-free cosmetic products. And they all have experienced a boom in sales since the beginning of COVID-19. Online conversion rates have doubled, and the basket values has increased at least 30%. So taking our vegan cosmetic company, Lolly, as example, they have been very responsive and launched a chemical-free hand sanitizer at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. And it just received a massive order from an international hospitality group to get the products in their outlets. Another example would be our feminine hygiene products, Tampon Tribe. They do organic cotton tampon and direct a portion of its manufacturing capability to produce face masks. So all companies can be responsive to the situation. And we have witnessed a lot of them struggle during this pandemic due to the shutdown of their supply chain. Most especially if their products are manufactured, let's say, in China or in Europe. In some cases, they have simply just lost the chance to generate cash flow during this time. So therefore, we are also interested in companies with local supply chains. And in the future, we believe some companies will stop relying on global suppliers and instead focus on local production, which will be supported by companies focused on environmental sustainability. This is why brands that produce locally and help people deal with the health crisis, especially ever since the COVID situation. So I've been cleaning my apartment and spraying myself and things around me on a daily basis. But every time I smell the chemicals in my cleaning supplies, I was wondering what it could do to my body in the long run after being exposed to these chemicals on a regular basis. And I'm sure this is a concern for many people. Just think about a startup that sells locally produced chemical-free cleaning supplies and that effective, and the great potential that they could have in this environment. And in conclusion, non-business, which provides necessities such as food and products and services that people use daily, and business that they are health and wellness related, and business that provide technology innovation that bring convenience and protection to people's life will be our best bets for investments.
Great. And so the last question is, so what startup sectors will be diminished or eliminated by COVID-19?
Yeah, so we can certainly see some sectors diminishing over time as a result of coronavirus pandemic. Unfortunately, like that applies to all business and not just startup. Factually speaking, business that related to common social interaction have taken a hit. We can imagine in the upcoming future, sectors that do not work well with the social distancing concept or business that raise questions regarding hygiene will diminish. For example, business, hospitality industry, fitness studios, or large events, gatherings, or even like beauty treatments. So there are some sectors that may not have enough room for growth or profits, and it would not be wise to start a company in that sector. And some retail business, such as those with heavy real estate investment, have been struggling during this time. Remember back to the pre-COVID time when the world was debating whether it's still a good idea to invest in a storefront or to move their business completely online. And the COVID situation has become a catalyst, accelerating that decision. And if these fashion companies have a solid e-commerce structure and revenue and a healthy cash flow, the story could be different. When the customers can shift their shopping online and the company has no major issues in fulfilling the orders and the growing needs on online customer service. And finally, some businesses have already closed. And we have witnessed startup go out of business in the last 2 months because of poor cash flow. The elimination is happening really fast, which has exposed the financial weaknesses in companies in many industries. However, I do not think any elimination would be a permanent thing. Companies that are going to make it through this time will have to employ innovation in their offerings, in their supply chain, the operations, marketing effort, and financial management to survive the uncertainty.
Thank you for joining us today. As always, be sure to leave a review, subscribe to this podcast, and share it with others. Let's go start up something today. Halti Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for the basis of investment decisions.